12. We believe in science. 11. We presume it is a virtue to give credence to the conclusions of science. 10. Our belief in science makes us different from those who don't believe in science.
An endorsement of scientific thinking must first of all be distinguished from any belief that members of the occupational guild called science are particularly wise or noble. The culture of science is based on the opposite belief. Its signature practices, including open debate, peer review, and double-blind methods, are designed to circumvent the sins to which scientists, being human, are vulnerable.
9. Think about this, though.
Data on how much of the scientific literature is reproducible are rare and generally bleak. The best-known analyses from psychology and cancer biology found rates of around 40% and 10% respectively.
8. There is something called the reproducibility or replication crisis. 7. 70% of researchers in one survey had tried and failed to replicate the results of another scientist's peer-reviewed experiments. 6. This issue occurs across scientific disciplines. 5. It is not only the soft sciences that have difficulty replicating experimental results. 4. The authority we congratulate ourselves for granting to science may not always be earned. Earn, a word inherited from Germanic, cognate with Old Dutch arnen, to obtain as a reward for labor, Old High German arnon, to harvest, reap. To redeem, redress. To obtain as a reward for labor, to acquire. The same Germanic base as Old English earn, E-R-N, in the compound rugern, apparently literally rye harvest, the name of a month, August or September. We presume it is a virtue to give credence to the conclusions of science. 3. If this is an acceptable standard, aren't scientists essentially saying, trust our science not because it's good science, but because we're the scientists and you're not?
So I hear the voices, and I read the front page, and I know the speculation, but I'm the decider, and I decide what is best.
2. It would seem that the results of an experiment published in a peer-reviewed journal should be reproducible by other researchers, and if they are not, then the experiment, its results, and whatever truth claim the researchers make based on their experimental results should not be considered a solid foundation upon which to further the development of human knowledge. 1. The Laffer curve has simultaneously been the justification for 40 years of Republican tax policy and consistently wrong at predicting government tax receipts, despite the insistence of its proponents. So it's not as if only valid truth claims drive decisions, even important ones. But Laffer's napkin was far from a peer-reviewed journal, and I would think scientists would want to hold themselves to a higher standard than Republicans have shown themselves willing to do.
I don't take responsibility at all because we were given a set of circumstances and we were given rules, regulations, and specifications from a different time.
8. I would like to expect more from authority.
Right, remember.
7. A scientist should earn authority by being able to conduct good science, not by coming up with the most surprising or eye-catching results or explanations for their results, not by latching onto or creating the next diet zeitgeist or exercise fad, not by producing the results that are most pleasing and profitable to corporate sponsors, and not by winning government grants for their academic unit. 6. Some scientists predictably respond to questions about the replication crisis by indicating that the science journalists reporting on this issue don't know what they're talking about. And what I hear them saying is that if the journalists were able to know what the scientists were talking about, then they would have become scientists instead of science reporters. That only scientists themselves can properly diagnose and triage the issue, and then address it, if they judge it to be something that needs addressing, among themselves, away from the prying eyes of the public, which has a tendency to misunderstand and sensationalize, and which also consists of a distressingly large number of individuals who possess an ideologically motivated anti-science interest that certain people have spent good money to put there. Science. From Anglo-Norman and Middle French, where it meant knowledge, understanding, secular knowledge. Knowledge derived from experience, study, or reflection. Acquired skill or ability. Knowledge was granted by God, 12th century in Old French. The collective body of knowledge in a particular field or sphere, 13th century. Derived from the Latin scientia, knowledge as opposed to belief. Understanding. Expert knowledge. A particular branch of knowledge. Learning, erudition. On the distinction between science and art, ultimately this distinction is informed by that in ancient Greek between episteme and techne, reflected by a similar distinction in classical Latin between scientia and ars. 5. The legitimate fear that doubt and lack of consensus within the scientific community will be cynically exploited to delay or prevent important science-informed societal action gets combined with authorities' distaste at ever having to answer for itself to anybody it considers of lower status, to create a lack of transparency, and in this situation the response to expressions of concern by the public is more often than not the assertion that only authority is qualified to police itself, followed by the empty promise that it will do so. 4. The majority of the public in most cases will accede to this arrangement, but only for a time, until not only the failure of authority to properly police itself becomes transparent, but so does the fact that authority never really had any intention of doing such policing in the first place, that every time it seemed to be doing so it was actually just a performance of policing, self-regulation as theater, and had another aim, whether that was an acknowledgement of the fact that the public required a scapegoat, or to advance a particular member's power play, or in service to a larger point authority wished to prove, such as, for example, that women should never have been allowed into the highest levels of authority, just as authority had been asserting from the start. 3. I can acknowledge that the pressure of running my thoughts through the longer sentences required by this stratum's configuration led to my point getting away from me a little bit that last sentence and a half. The idea having ascended, so to speak, from the more specific category of scientific authority to a more general conception of authority in its various manifestations. 2. The situation during the last few weeks in Minneapolis is certainly contributing to my difficulty maintaining focus on scientific authority, as the question of authority has become central for many as we agonize over what was, in the case of George Floyd's killing, not simply an egregious abuse of police authority, but was actually a public staging of police authority's confidence that it could not be policed, not by fellow officers, not by any number of citizen witnesses, and not by the cameras recording its actions as it methodically, over nearly 9 minutes, crushed the life out of a man who was posing no threat to anyone. One. It would not invalidate the larger point if this particular malefactor, as one would hope, proves to have been wrong about its impunity in this case. 7. Can we assume that there was a series of observations on the part of the malefactor of the innumerable instances of police authority serving the cause of racial terror in its own city and state and nation, and the dearth of repercussions faced by the perpetrators in those cases, and acknowledge that its conclusion that there would be no adverse consequences to itself for similar behavior was, however morally reprehensible, a reasonable one, in the sense of its being based on a rational evaluation of likely outcomes, even if it turns out, in this case, to be incorrect. 6. How much longer will we choose to live in a world where rational actors can come to the conclusion that conducting a public lynching might be included among the universe of acceptable options? I would like to expect more from authority. 5. Obviously, It's not as if rushing along or fudging the results of some experiment is as bad as conducting a lynching. 4. What I'm trying to get at is what the people who do those things have in common. 3. One thing is, they think they're going to get away with it. 2. Another thing is, they think they should get away with it.
There is a perceived or real crisis over the reproducibility and transparency of scientific reporting. This crisis is surely being mismanaged by scientists, and they have only themselves to blame. Scientific pursuit requires a highly specialized training, and consequently, so does the assessment of the validity of reported science. Yet, while scientists figure out how to deal with the current crisis, they are allowing journalists, defamation rings, and anonymous nobodies to tell them what to do. This nonsense where anyone says whatever they want and pours their anger on the internet only fuels the current hysteria over fake science.
1. So when I draw comparisons between cops who think they can kill with impunity and scientists who publish experiments that might not be ready for publication, and maybe I bring in bishops who send pedophile rapists off to a new parish when the whispering gets too loud, or even a public office holder who thinks because he won an election that this means no one's allowed to ask any questions about how he conducts his public and private business. I'm really just pointing out that authority has a lot of gall to assert that the public should trust that they're behaving responsibly when they offer only their own good word as proof. If this is an acceptable standard, aren't scientists essentially saying, trust our science not because it's good science, but because we're the scientists and you're not? 11. The situation in this city and nation demands meaningful language. 10. The simple machine puts the same constraints upon language, whether it's meaningful or frivolous. 9. The tension implied by the juxtaposition of the previous two sentences places the machine operator system under some strain. 8. The operator muddles through the best he can.
Strap it in for another trip around the whatever.
7. In consideration of the operator's age, skin color, gender, socioeconomic status, access to education, and relationship to the concerns being expressed by the protesters, the rioters, the outside agitators if the rumors of such turn out to be true, the activists, and the entrenched business, police, and political interests, the operator has concluded that he should leave the meaningful language to others. 6. Yet at the same time, whether this is a timeless truth for any network of human organisms or something unique to our current era with its access to 24-hour news, illimitably updating social media feeds, and various other means of exposure to the words, images, and thoughts of our fellow humans, not to mention the myriad contributions of computer intelligences programmed to replicate human thought in written language, new content must constantly be generated. 5. If the operator is going to be frank, then the considerations he laid out 2 sentences ago regarding the relationship of his numerous privileges with the nature of the political, economic, and social dialogue being conducted among society at large are not the sole reason he is hesitant to contribute meaningful language of his own to the discourse. 4. We know the shape of meaningful language, the way it feels on the tongue as we speak it, the rhythm of the sentences as we read it, the kinds of words of which it consists. And while the operator of this machine doesn't want to impugn the deployment of meaningful language by anyone acting in good faith, he has some reservations about language structures that come in such recognizable patterns, especially when they arise out of his own mind. As he knows all too well how often the demands of candor and the requirements of form diverge. And he knows equally well how tempting it is to choose form when they do. To opt for that which is recognizable as true because it comes in a shape that truth has taken in the past, instead of venturing a new expression that is strange and jarring and even awkward. And sometimes, in dark moments, he wonders whether the truths we need most ever really come in a form we recognize.
Well, I can remember the end clearly. I was in the ocean, but like maybe even like the stairs, the concrete stairs by, actually that's a lot what it was like, by the Mississippi River here by my walk. And first this, well, I can't think what it's called. It's like a walrus. It's a big thing, but it wasn't quite a walrus. Like bigger than a seal, smaller than a walrus. I don't know, manatee or something, comes out of the water, and a lot of like the same kind of creature had been coming out of the water, and it had this weird mask on its head, like it had a unicorn's horn, but it was like getting ground down, and some scientific team had caught him and put the mask on to protect the unicorn horn. But I only say that, I didn't think that in the dream. It's just that's what it looked like. Like if it had a horn, that's what this would be protecting. And then released it back into the wild. So it had to live with the indignity of this stupid safety helmet. So one of those comes out of the water. On its back is a dove, and on the dove's back is an enormous cockroach. And I said that to the person I was with. I don't remember what an odd pairing that was. I don't remember who the person I was with was. But there was a lot of that, like talking with people down by the ocean. And then at the very end, a pot of, I guess they look, I thought they were whales, because we could hear them like doing the whale talk. But it looked like a killer whale, which isn't a whale. Anyway, and it like flew out of the water and flipped itself up in the air, and then splat landed right on the concrete stair kind of area, but flat, not the stairs. And kind of knew it was going to happen at the time. And then that woke me up.
3. Please forgive this peroration, which will be brief. 2. Try to be open to truth that doesn't look like truth usually does. 1. Try to risk speaking the truth in new and unproven language.
You can never catch a little wisdom. I guess if you get some. If you catch some and the Mets win.